Has Lamar Jackson played his last game in a Baltimore Ravens uniform, or will he be in Baltimore for the long haul? We talk about that, continue talking about the Ravens wild card loss, looking ahead to the offseason for the Ravens and more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back here. Welcome into another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I am your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here with us today, tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. Free and available, of course, on all platforms, including over on YouTube in video format. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. We are in day 3 of the Ravens offseason after their 24-17 loss to the Bengals in the wild card round, effectively, of course, ending their season there. And here to talk about Lamar Jackson, that Bengals game, offseason talk, draft talk, and a bunch more, Spencer Schultz of Baltimore Beatdown. A Taco Wednesday here on Locked On Ravens with Spencer. And Spencer, I know it was a disappointing way for the Ravens to end their season, especially one that I think a lot of people are talking about such high expectations coming into that year. But I will give the Ravens credit where it's due. Despite the loss, I think they did fight one heck of a game against Cincinnati, all things considered.
Definitely, you really couldn't have asked for a better performance from Tyler Huntley. I think this coaching staff that designed themselves, we talked about this last week, designed themselves to play the Bengals and really the AFC North has. If you go look, I believe it's going to slip. Arjun Menron, I think, from PFF said that the Bengals were 9-2 against non-AFC North opponents. I think Joe Burrow had like an 18-2 touchdown ratio or something like that. Then against the AFC North, he had like a 70-something passer rating, threw 13 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and went 4-3. So the AFC North did not waste any time in responding to the Bengals' 2021 season, and I think the Ravens led that charge. They played Burrow 3 times, held him under 250 yards passing every single time. They were completely in tune with stopping the Bengals from generating explosive plays. They made the Bengals have to work down the field. They generated pressure. They tackled really well. They shut down the run game, all of those things defensively. And then offensively, we see the Ravens suddenly bust out a double move, mirrored Demarcus Robinson and Sammy Watkins, a 41-yard touchdown. And I thought that was really quite a operatic, climactic swan song potentially from Greg Roman. He loves to run his kind of safety net, his banky, as I call it, his 4 hitches, his 4 stops, all stops. Everybody runs a curl or a hitch or whatever you want to call it. And in that, Tyler Huntley, they call it for him so much, particularly. And then he hits a pump fake on it. Demarcus Robinson, we see, have a massive double move in the preseason, looks so smooth. We've seen a sprinkle of those throughout the regular season, and trailing 17-10 on the road against a really good divisional opponent in the playoffs with your season on the line, they hit that huge play. So what the Ravens defense did in the fourth quarter following the fumble, all of those things, it really is a shame that the fumble did take place. And hey, maybe the Bengals go into clutch time and Joe Burrow goes and pulls it out, and maybe that breaks your heart just a little bit cleaner, not as messy of a death. But ultimately this team, I think, had a galvanizing loss, and knowing that they could play with the Bengals without Lamar Jackson, and that they did have all these guys fight back from injury and their receivers go down and all of these things, and it didn't matter. They still coached up to task. They still played up to task. They still were able to limit the Bengals. You feel good about what the defense did and them preventing the Bengals from putting the game away at any point in the fourth quarter. All of those things, getting the ball back time and time again, it just was an unfortunate loss, one that's definitely painful. I would say, definitely top 5 most painful playoff losses that the Ravens have experienced. I'd probably throw the only 2 that are really undisputed as Billy Cundiff and Troy Polamalu's pick 6 ahead of that. But it was a valiant effort. I don't think that many people thought the Ravens would be able to make it as close as they did. And for them to be, an elbow length away from taking the lead, going up 24-17 in Cincinnati was spectacular in many ways. But their failure to retain that lead just as spectacular as getting to that point. So it was a really high-flying game in many ways and was high on probably entertainment value for so many people to be saying, oh, why'd they put this one on Sunday night? Well, it's AFC North football, and some people don't like it that much, but got a pretty entertaining one. And it was a hard-hitting, a smack-talking affair. Guys like Marcus Peters going at it, Roquan Smith continuing to hit through, Kyle Hamilton forcing a big fumble, all that stuff. So as opposed to seeing a blowout loss, I think it was a tough pill to swallow when Huntley fumbled. But at the end of the day, I think that you can kind of rally knowing that you were that close with all of the noise and all of the distractions and all of the, downward thoughts that people had about this team and about Harbaugh and about the staff and the receivers and the players and all of those kinds of things. So they almost got it done. It's not horseshoes and nor is it hand grenades, but I think really can hang your hat on a loss in this one.
Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of people have been talking about all week in terms of would you rather see your favorite team, and I've been talking about it, would you rather see them be blown out 40-0? You kind of accept it in the first quarter and are like, well, this is pretty disappointing. Would you rather have it go down to the wire and have it be a heartbreaking loss? But I think in the loss, you're right. They showed a lot of things that not a lot of people gave him a chance to show. And for Tyler Huntley, outside of the fumble and the interception early, I think he did play one heck of a game. So I tip my hat, but unfortunately they could not get the job done. But Spencer, I know a lot of the conversation now shifts to the offseason, and the offseason is going to be it's going to be eventful regardless of what happens, because you have obviously not only situations with who are they going to bring in free agency wise and draft wise, and who are they going to bring back. One of the players that is going to really take the cake this offseason is going to be Lamar Jackson and what his status is. Now, Jackson over the past couple days on Instagram has posted a couple things on his Instagram story. People have gone crazy about it. On Monday, he posted something about, appreciating things. And then on Tuesday, posted a couple pictures of him in a Ravens uniform. One of them said loading. So people have naturally just, tried to analyze every little microscopic detail of that. But the Ravens players in the locker room during locker room cleanouts, very supportive publicly of Lamar Jackson and saying that they want him to be in Baltimore for the long haul, be with them for as long as they're Ravens. So, Spencer, the question now becomes, has Lamar Jackson played his last game in a Ravens uniform, or will he be there for the long haul? What kind of read do you get, whether it's gut feeling or anything you've heard? Where's your mind at in terms of what Lamar will be doing next year and where he'll be playing next year?
Well, I really think of it in two clear splits. Two clear kind of thoughts have stuck with me throughout this entire time. On one hand, the Ravens, according to Adam Schefter, according to Chris Mortensen, according to Marcus Spears, according to Jay Glazer, all of them, offered Lamar basically a contract of $250 million, a 5-year extension past this season. So it would have been a 6-year, $275 million deal that included significantly more guaranteed money up front than Kyler Murray or Russell Wilson got. They essentially pretended that the Deshaun Watson deal didn't happen and gave, in that hypothetical, Lamar Jackson a record-setting contract. He declined. From what I have heard, and you can take it with 1,000 grains of salt, they were trying to work the guaranteed money out to Lamar's liking and then hit the deadline of the season starting, and talks were shut down. But the one thing that will stick with me on that side of them wanting to keep Lamar or keeping Lamar, if they got to the point of offering him that much money for that period of time, the Ravens are a very stubborn organization. They lay down their blueprints and they do everything they can to be process-oriented and stick to the plan. If the plan was to pay Lamar Jackson a boatload of money, I think they pay Lamar Jackson a boatload of money. Getting from, let's say, $190 million guaranteed, practically guaranteed, that's, I think, what people get confused by. Kyler Murray didn't get $165 million or $180 million, whatever it was, in fully guaranteed money. He got it in practical guaranteed money, which is viewed as his workout and roster bonuses in 2025 being viewed as money that he will have attained, which may or may not happen. To deviate for one sentence on Kyler Murray, the Cardinals, I think, can save $30 million by parting ways with him in 2026, if I'm not mistaken. So to me, that's not fully guaranteed money. It's practically guaranteed money, which is very confusing overall to say. They sound like the same thing. I get it. People get confused when they see all of that. So to me, the Ravens said, all right, we're going to pony up. And I think bringing in Sashi Brown was maybe a little bit a part of that. And Sashi Brown coming from the NBA, dealing with fully guaranteed contracts, which do have some levity, some flexibility still with some options and some different levers you can still pull within those fully guaranteed, I'm air quoting for listeners, structure. There could be room there. On the other hand, it feels like there was a great amount of frustration from the Ravens locker room. There's some rumblings this week, some things that were leaked, all of that good kind of stuff. And it felt like very strange. It felt very strange that he never stepped on a practice field or threw a football even, let alone, he never attempted to play. To me, in my conspiracy tinfoil hat, that makes me somewhat feel like the Ravens might not have wanted him to play. Why would the Ravens might not have wanted him to play? Maybe they have a deal in place. Maybe they have a suitor who would have nixed the deal if he had played. And I think, that's a little conspiracy theorist of me. And it sounds like Lamar Jackson, went and posted and did things and tweeted things and said all of these things. But I just really think when you hear guys like Sean Payton and Robert Griffin and Mike Vick and all these guys going at it and these big explosive debates, I mean, it has gotten so polarizing. But basically what I'm trying to say is on one side, the Ravens offered him a boatload of money, and I don't see them not sticking to their plan. But on the other side, there's a laundry list of things that have come out. And you can say, well, this one sounds silly, but then there's 35 more that he didn't get treatment last year, that maybe he wasn't getting treatment until a certain article came out that said he wasn't getting treatment. And then suddenly his teammates are posting him on the trainer's room the following day. More and more and more and more and more and more and more rumors and rumors and rumors and rumors. And you can take each one with a grain of salt, but when there's smoke, there's usually fire. So I just find it to be a very strange and unique situation. I think that the notion that the Ravens wouldn't have paid him if he did get hurt and, let's say, did have a season-ending tear of a knee ligament as a result of playing, like Dak Prescott still got paid after a really devastating injury. Deshaun Watson has torn his ACL twice and has had very high-profile off-the-field drama and accusations and court cases and everything of the sort. So I always found that aspect strange. I think if Lamar Jackson tears his ACL, they're still going to franchise tag him at the very least. They're still going to give him $50 million next year. They're still going to give all of those things. So I've always found that notion a little strange that if he was hurt, that he wouldn't get paid. I think with the rarity of the skill set of the NFL quarterback that can succeed, it's rare to find those. And I think that's why Dak still gets paid and Deshaun still gets paid and all of these people still get paid. There's only 15-ish guys that can really go play high-level, talented quarterback in the NFL at a given time. So I think it's a very fluid situation, but I don't know. I guess if I have to put the proverbial gun to my head, I guess, I think that, again, the Ravens just stick to their plans. They always, always, always go back to their plans. They are very confident in their processes, and if that process led them to paying him almost $200 million guaranteed and, giving him that monster contract, then I think they continue to try and work and figure it out. But the wild card is, does Lamar Jackson want to be in Baltimore, or does he just want to go to the highest bidder? So it takes two to tango a little bit. I think that if Lamar Jackson would have held out this past offseason, that it could have maybe put the Ravens' feet to the fire, but he didn't do that. It's been a weird situation, and everyone says his mother's representing him and he doesn't have an agent, but he was represented by the NFLPA, and he does have his own team of attorneys that are not represented and not allowed to speak with the Ravens through the NFL collective bargaining agreement. You must be certified by the NFLPA, and his people were not. So it's really a strange and I want to say somewhat unprecedented situation, and it's going to be a quite laboring, drawn-out ESPN first take narrative story segment, this, that, and the other, talking heads nonstop until it gets figured out. So hopefully it is figured out in the next couple months here, and we can move to the next chapter, whatever that is.
Yeah, you're right in terms of it does take two to tango. Both sides have to be in on this, where the Ravens want to have Lamar Jackson there and Lamar Jackson wants to be in Baltimore. Both those things have to happen. So I do still think I'm still hopeful that the two sides will be able to get something done. I guess that's my gut feeling, but something has just felt off over the past maybe couple months, I guess. I don't know what it is. I can't necessarily put my finger on it right now, but I do think that in terms of, that there are only a handful of players that you can trust who are consistent. You can say are top tier quarterbacks in this league. I think Lamar Jackson falls under that category. So for me, I do think that it would be the right decision for the Ravens to give him a big contract. But again, there's so many other factors that go into that, where it's not as simple as just, the two sides agreed on a big contract. That's it. It is guarantees. It is Lamar fully there? Are the Ravens fully there? So a lot to still dive into in that. And we'll continue talking about it in the second segment here, talking about maybe potential trade packages, what a contract could look like, and more coming up next on Locked On Ravens. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM, and you've heard me talk about this mobile game app, and I can't tell you how much fun I had competing against my fellow Locked On NFL hosts. I did not win, but I still had a lot of fun doing it, so it's the fun that counts, but I also would have liked to win. But now it's your turn to compete. More on that later, but if you ever dream of becoming an NFL general manager or managing a football franchise, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. You'll manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through seasons, and lead your team to glory, trying to build a dynasty. And with Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, making draft picks, and navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft and all the ups and downs of a season. And also in Football GM, there's a ton of things you can do. It's really a whole experience, and you should play and compete with your friends, your family. It is super fun and all that in a challenging and realistic game world. Also, in Football GM is completely free and playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. And soon for Locked On Ravens fans, Also in Football GM will be hosting a special competition where you can win amazing monthly prizes. Stay tuned for details in an upcoming episode. Locked On Ravens listeners get 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. Make sure to check it out today. Download the games, visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM, start your dynasty today. We're back here with our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with Spencer Schultz. And Spencer, let's continue the Lamar Jackson train. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack and dive into. And of course, it's unless an extension is signed tomorrow or the next day or whenever, we're going to be talking about it up until a resolution is reached. So if the Ravens do, I'll go back to your kind of tinfoil conspiracy you talked about. If they do decide that a trade is in the best interest for them, or Lamar decides he doesn't want to be there and requests out and a trade is made, have you given any more thought to what your ideal trade package would look like? Would it be just a boatload of first round picks, not necessarily, and maybe a young player in there? Would you rather have a proven quarterback given to the Ravens plus maybe a first round pick? What's your ideal package if the Ravens and Lamar Jackson decide to part ways via a trade?
I think the Ravens need to have a plan in place. I think is really to overgeneralize. They need to have a clear, defined blueprint to what that looks like after the trade takes place. The compensation is going to be as good as they can get. If Lamar doesn't want to be in Baltimore, Lamar doesn't want to be in Baltimore. If you don't want to pay him the amount that he's asking, then you don't want to pay him the amount that he's asking. So if they're going to trade him, you trade him to the highest bidder. The things they think they need to consider are that, hey, he probably is going to raise the floor of whatever team he goes to pretty quickly. So you need to try and maximize the value you get on the 2022 return, in my opinion, to some degree. We did see, the Eagles, as a result of the Carson Wentz trade, have seemingly had multiple first-round picks. They've somehow parlayed that into years of multiple first-round picks and a really heavy talent infusion into what they've done. So, again, they're going to have 2 more first-round picks in 2023 after, it's been years since Carson Wentz was in Philly. So I think they need to take a look at that and see how they can continue to parlay. But in terms of if they are to move forward, don't go get a Derek Carr. Don't go get a middling veteran quarterback. Don't go get someone that costs money. Go the rookie quarterback route. I think that people are going to hate this take very much, but if they do keep Lamar Jackson, it's time for them to get a new offensive coordinator. It's been a 5-year stint. Their offense, for various reasons, whether it's their own fault, whether it's his fault, whether it's, bad luck, whatever. Greg Roman has not been able to quite get the fan favoritism of success and cookies and milk and all the beautiful things. So I think that if you are to keep Lamar Jackson, you move forward. If you don't, I think Greg Roman has a really nice system for a young quarterback to step in and get acclimated. So I think fans would be very much up in arms if they were to trade Lamar and keep Greg Roman, and there would be thousands and thousands of tweets saying, Greg Roman outlasted Lamar. I'm sick. I'm never watching Ravens game again. That's all good and dandy. But I think he has a nice system. I think we see that with Tyler Huntley, where you can kind of limit mistakes, limited opposing teams' possessions. You have a really good defense. If you can get borderline playoff caliber winning football out of Tyler Huntley, what can you get out of Anthony Richardson with a little bit of development? What can you get out of another quarterback that's a first-round talent in that system? So I think that's something to take into consideration. But overall, I mean, the Broncos traded 2 firsts and a second for Russell Wilson. I think that might be right around the price that you get, somewhere around there. And you got to really hope that you can maximize that in 2023 or try and parlay that into a long series like the Eagles have had of first round pick, 2 years later, first round pick, and just keep that kind of cow cashed in. So an interesting situation, but kind of really depends. Hey, who's going to want him? And is it going to be the Panthers, the Falcons, the Saints? Feels like, and hey, maybe even the Bucs. One of those 4 NFC teams might really be in play to give you a ton. Maybe the Bucs are able to, give you a king's ransom to try and take a swing and continue the Tom Brady era. They do have a pretty talented roster, and maybe they would be willing to give you 3 firsts or something of the sort to move forward. But takes 2 to tango in that sense as well with the team. So I would expect that the minimum would be about 2 firsts and a day 2 pick. Somewhere around there feels like what I think the Ravens would receive. The opposing team is going to have to, or the other team is going to have to give him an extension and all of that good stuff. So it's a tall task. And I think that something we've heard a lot of guys talk about, and a guy like Mike Florio, and sometimes, and hey, maybe they say some pretty crazy things, but when these kind of polls come out, and Mike Sando does in the offseason of, GMs and front office executives ranking quarterbacks, and Lamar Jackson's 11th. And then a lot of people go out and say, well, if you had an agent, I bet he'd be ranked higher. Agents do increase your perception. They do sing your gospel and preach your values. So I'm curious to know what another team would offer. I don't think it's going to be like 4 firsts or something like that. Hey, maybe it would be 3, but I'm curious of what the value is, considering that, the Ravens were at the bridge of paying him as much as the Falcons were going to pay Deshaun Watson reportedly, or the Saints were looking to, and no one was really willing to go up into that Deshaun Watson Browns territory of that contract. So what the Browns did, I mean, in hindsight, was truly unprecedented in terms of resetting, quote unquote, resetting the market or paying above market value while dumping all of those first round picks. It was quite a sight for what Cleveland did. And I think it's going to be curious to see if the Ravens get to the point where they're going to trade him. Where do you strike? How do you strike? What quarterback are you eyeing up? What pick are you going to have? Are you basically going to take Lamar picks and parlay them into a rookie quarterback and maybe come out of it with 1 extra first round pick or something like that? Or are you going to try and slow play it a little bit more? So hold on to those picks, draft a bunch of first rounders over the next, let's say 2-3 years, and try and really just talent inject the roster while trying to, win 10 games next year and then looking to reopen a Super Bowl window afterwards.
Yeah, and even in that Broncos-Seahawks deal, the Broncos gave up 2 players. They gave up Noah Fant and Shelby Harris, so it kind of gives perception into a player like Lamar Jackson, who is, one, so polarizing himself, but, he's 26 years old. Russell Wilson is a lot older than that. So I think and obviously Russell Wilson has a Super Bowl championship, and I don't want to take that away from him or anything. There are different levels to it. But I'm also really curious. But I'm also curious to hear your thoughts, Spencer, about if we go the other route, if the Ravens do agree to an extension with Lamar Jackson, if your perception of what that deal looks like has changed based off of, maybe it's injuries, maybe it's something else. But what's your, I guess, ideal contract for both sides with Lamar Jackson and the Ravens if they come to an agreement?
I mean, in an ideal world, it's something that gives the Ravens maximum flexibility. I think that wishing for, if you want a fan perspective and then wishing for them to not maximize the flexibility that they would have would be foolish. But I think a fair deal, I guess is a better way to put it, maybe would be $200 million guaranteed over, a 5-year period. And the Ravens paying him $150 million up front, basically. giving that to him in cash over the first year, and then having some sort of flexibility after a year 3 or a year 4. So I think that's kind of where you're looking. I think that most deals usually are 3-year deals in hindsight. I think you look at Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, like their deals are 3-4 year deals. Kyler Murray's deal, like I said, the Cardinals can get out from that deal in 2026. They're not pinned there for 6, 7, 8 years. So the Deshaun Watson deal is another story. It's really tough for them to move. And the Ravens really got to hitch their wagon to Lamar Jackson. And it's tough. So I would say that, 5 years, $260 million maybe, and move the guaranteed money up, because somebody's got to meet somebody in the middle at some point. Otherwise, you're just taking the Ravens to the cleaners, maximizing, the guaranteed money over having any sort of flexibility to make sure there's a good team around. So I think it's a strange situation, but I'd say somewhere in that ballpark, $200 million guaranteed and $260 million over 5 years, somewhere around there.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting situation to monitor over the course of however long it is, but we should have some resolution at some point. I mean, we're going to have to at some point, and we'll see whether the Ravens and Lamar can agree to something or whether he'll be playing somewhere else next year. My gut feeling is still it's still he stays, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. There's a lot to unpack and dive into over the course of the coming days, weeks, months, however long it takes. But coming up in our final segment, we'll be talking a bit about the Ravens draft pick, 22 overalls, where they'll be picking in the first round of 2023. We'll talk a bit about some mailbag questions, Ben Powers, Greg Roman, and more. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a lot to talk about on the show. But first, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline, and BetOnline.net is the #1 source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from the football playoffs to basketball season. They've got it all over at BetOnline. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website, later use mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. We are back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens with Spencer Schultz. I am Kevin Ostreicher, still here. And Spencer, we now officially know where the Ravens will be picking in the 2023 draft. They got 22 overall. Would have been 23, but the Dolphins were obviously stripped of their first round pick, so the Ravens move up by proxy of that. Do you like where the Ravens landed? And what do you think they do with the pick overall? Is it a wide receiver? Is it a corner? Or do you think they maybe trade out of it?
Well, with this corner class, looking at guys like Cam Smith, Joey Porter, some of those, I think the Ravens will likely trade out. I don't think those guys are going to fall. With Devin Witherspoon being included in that group, I suppose there's kind of like 3-4 corners that maybe 5 corners that end up in the first round. And the Ravens have to really love one of those guys. But with so few picks, I think it would be a little surprising if the Ravens get somebody on the phone that they don't trade back. Christian Gonzalez, another one, Clark Phillips, all these guys. But receiver-wise, it's tough a little bit. I think you can look at Quentin Johnston and go see someone who shows a lot of really flashy traits. You can go see to me, really, what I'm going to get to is that the only receiver that really moves the needle for me in the first round is probably going to be Jackson Smith-Njigba. I've got a lot more breaking down to do, but to me, he feels like the most complete player aside from basically having a 5th gear, and would be someone that Ravens have looked at. The Ravens tried to go get Juju Smith-Schuster. I think he's in that kind of mold of a true possession receiver that can move the chains constantly, generate separation over the middle of the field, can go win for you, can do some creative things after the catch while he's not a game breaker in the sense of speed. He's kind of like an Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I'll be looking to those types of players. A tackle, I don't think would be maybe an Anton Harrison out of Oklahoma. I don't think that would be insane. I don't think an edge rusher would be crazy, but the Ravens like to stick to their board. But I would really bank on them trading out at 22. 22 is kind of right at the border of where some top 15 players might be. I think we've seen some instances over the last couple years. A guy like Montez Sweat, who did have, a weird medical situation, but things like that. So 22 is right in the spot where they might be able to stick somewhere, but it's a long ways away. I'm excited to break down the draft season and get into it, but this draft class is an interesting one, a really deep edge class, a nice cornerback class, running backs galore, and receivers a little strange in this one. I think there's some nice day 2 receivers, but kind of feels like there's maybe not a plethora of top-end talent like there has been the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, the trend for Baltimore 2019, they took a wide receiver in the first round to Marquise Brown. 2021, it was Rashad Bateman. So for following the 2-year trend, maybe the Ravens take another one in 2023. But I also think they probably trade out, or at least trade, a little bit further back into the first round or very early second, because they don't have a second round pick due to that Roquan Smith trade, which was a win for the Ravens anyway. But I still think they've been public about, or at least Eric DeCosta talked about after that 2019 draft when they didn't have a second round pick. And I know, Spencer, we talked about it too, where there were just so many guys in that second round where you're thinking, oh, it would have been great to have an Eric McCoy or Creed Humphrey back when they didn't have a second round pick then. So I think it's not necessarily like make or break. It won't make or break the draft class if they don't end up getting a second rounder and they make the pick at 22. But I think that if they could move back to like 29 or 30, pick up maybe a mid to late second in that conversation too, it makes a lot of sense, honestly, based off of the lack of draft picks. And they aren't in line to get any compensatory picks this year either. So they're not going to be getting any extras there. But we did have a question from Tuse. What do you think about a corner in the first round if a really good wide receiver is not on the board? I think personally, my top choice, this may be controversial, my top choice for a player position-wise in the first round would be a corner, and wide receiver would be my second choice. Do you flip-flop on that, Spencer, or do you think corner would be their top choice?
To me, versus what they would do, I mean, they value cornerbacks incredibly much so. They've done nothing but tell us that for a long time, dating well back into Ozzie Newsome's days. And while Ozzie Newsome is still there and still very much involved in this process, I think people get lost in the mix a little bit. But I think they're going to value corner a lot more. But it's strange, suddenly if you don't pick a wide receiver, if you don't sign one, you're relying on Rashad Bateman coming back from a foot injury. If they don't sign a free agent by that point in time, then you're talking about, probably having your feet held to the fire trying to make a trade. Guys like DeAndre Hopkins have been floated, but I think there are some nice day two wide receivers, some guys that are capable of moving the ball. Cedric Tillman out of Tennessee, someone who strikes me. Parker Washington, another one. But a couple Maryland guys, a couple guys out of the ACC, Zay Flowers. So I think weird spot to be in, but Ravens like to stick to their board. I don't think they've done much to tell us that they don't value corner a little more, but the Ravens' whole philosophy has been that there's a market inefficiency at wide receiver, and they're going to get a wide receiver in the draft. And it feels like the white whale at this point. We get a little taste of Rashad Bateman being the guy for just a fleeting moment over the first couple games of the season, and then he's gone. So in order for you to take advantage of a market inefficiency, you essentially have to hit at wide receiver. So I just don't know if a Jackson Smith and Jigba's not there, maybe a Jordan Addison, that the Ravens are going to go out of their way to do that at this point after they've already invested so much, not even invested, spent so much at that position. But at some point, something's got to give.
Yeah, it does. And I think for me, the corner pick would be if they don't go out there and either trade for somebody or sign a veteran. This receiver class for agency-wise isn't very strong. You're kind of looking at the Juju Smith-Schuster, DJ Charks, I think Jacoby Myers in that class, Alan Lazard. So those are the types of players you'd be looking at. And guys, there will be guys who get cut, and we'll see who those players are. You can throw Odell Beckham in that conversation. Maybe Odell Beckham is finally the guy that comes to Baltimore. But it'll be interesting to see what they do at 22. But Spencer, another mailbag question from Mueller's asks, how much will Ben Powers cost to keep? And this is an interesting one, because Powers, I think, played so admirably this year. It was really, really good for them over the course of the season. And in a year where coming into this season, we didn't really know what the left guard position was going to look like. We didn't know how stable it was going to be. They're going to flip-flop. Who was even going to win the job in the offseason? But Powers comes in, does a really good job on an offensive line that I thought played pretty well throughout the entire course of the season. But now comes the question of how much will Powers actually cost to keep if they can keep him? And will the Ravens actually be able to keep him in a Ravens uniform? So what's your overall contract projection for what you think the Ravens could get Ben Powers for? And is it even realistic that the Ravens keep him at this point?
I think it could be realistic, but I don't think the Ravens go that route. I think they have Ben Cleveland in place already, who does still need a little bit of work, but has shown some okay things when he's gotten on the football field. I also don't think that Ben Powers is going to really break the bank. I could see maybe a 3-year, $30 million for him, something of that nature. I don't know that he's going to get super paid. I think he's come along really well in the Ravens system. He's been a really good player this year, has arguably been their best offensive lineman this season. But I feel like he's a little bit of a result of the system and having a ton of time in it, more so than a really talented athlete. But I think he deserves to be paid. I think he's proven that he is a pro. He should be a starter. He's been really sharp in the run game. And despite not being a spectacular athlete relative to his peers, he has been that consistent in terms of fundamentals and technique and being in tune with the concept. So Ben Power's a nice player. I would love to see the Ravens have continuity in their offensive line, something that, returning 5 starters to your offensive line makes you feel really good about your offense. If you have that and you can worry about the ancillary positions, the things that aren't on the ball, you've already got your tight ends in place. You're going to have J.K. Dobbins. You're going to have Gus Edwards back if you like. There's a really deep running back class. Suddenly you're really only talking about your quarterback and your wide receivers and those possibilities. So if they do keep Lamar Jackson, suddenly you might really only be looking at needing to fix your wide receiver room more or less, while you could make some additions to some other rooms. But I think keeping Ben Powers would be really cool.
Yeah, I think it would be too. It's just a matter of, again, will a team go out there and offer him $40 million over 3 years, or will the Ravens want to look elsewhere? Do they want to put Ben Cleveland in that situation to have him take over for Ben Powers? So we'll see. But I think keeping Ben Powers, and if you could return all 5 starters, what a deal that would be, based off of what we were talking about this offensive line this time last offseason and all the uncertainty surrounding some of those positions. But finally, Spencer, we have 2 questions from JP. One of them, do you think we'll be able to re-sign Lamar, or do you think we'll tag and trade him? We already talked about that one a little bit, so I want to focus more on the second one. Who do you think, or who do you want to see as the next offensive coordinator? So this is obviously assuming Baltimore does not bring back Greg Roman and they go a different direction. But do you have anybody on your short list, Spencer, of offensive coordinators you'd want to see, assuming they do bring back Lamar Jackson, or even if they don't?
I think that Brian Johnson, for me, it's always fun to speculate coaches. It's a really tough guessing game. For me, one that would be super fun would be Brian Johnson, who's the Eagles quarterback coach. He has been offensive coordinator at Houston. He's been an offensive coordinator at Utah. He's been an offensive coordinator at Florida. I think he marries the run and the pass really well. And to be able to steal a little bit from what the Eagles do and maybe move into a slightly more spread scheme that still has elements of a power football team, being able to steal some of the things they did there, I think would be a really fun idea. Who I think they end up going with, maybe it's a little bit too on the nose, would be Matt Weiss. Matt Weiss takes the same path as Mike Macdonald, goes to Jim Harbaugh in Michigan, becomes an offensive coordinator, and he was with the Ravens from 2009 to 2020, been on both sides of the football, understands the Raven way, understands what goes on. They're comfortable with him, and you'd hope that he, learns a couple of tricks from Jim and understands maybe some of the limitations that the Ravens had in their scheme and had some thoughts of his own. He was in charge of coaching strategy for the Ravens for 10 years as well, which included challenges and included go for it percentages and all of those things. So I think he is pretty sharp in terms of understanding situational play calling, understanding go for it percentages, things of that nature, and could be pretty good situationally. But I'd be lying if I said I knew what he would do in Baltimore. I think Brian Johnson, I have a little bit better idea. I think it would look like that spread power run game that incorporates a little bit more use of the width of the field. But Matt Weiss, to me, is the classic Harbaugh hire. I mean, it just happened with Mike Macdonald. Harbaugh and his brother, both Jim and John, really only like to play in their own backyard. So I would maybe another guess in that same essence would be Anthony Lynn, and maybe that's too on the nose because he followed up Greg Roman in Buffalo. But it feels like the relationship usually has to be there to some degree, and I think people would end up forgetting about the Mark Trestmans of the world. Oh, the Ravens go out and get this offensive genius. It's Mark Trestman. Maybe, another one, I'm sure the Ravens would possibly consider Frank Reich, but I haven't known John Harbaugh to bring in a coach that could possibly threaten his job down the road. That really also hasn't been the Harbaugh way either. So, what I think they should do, I can go in 1,000 directions. There's a ton of coaches, but they have their own process, and I think it yields a Matt Weiss.
Yeah, what a crazy situation. And it's something I've been talking about for the course of this week already, is the fact that if the Ravens do move on from Greg Roman, would it be an inside the organization, and Matt Weiss is kind of the air quotes inside the organization like Mike Macdonald was, or do they go completely outside and bring in somebody else? So it having a Michigan offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator who has been with the organization, it's literally almost the exact same path, only Weiss has been in Michigan, or he was in Michigan a little longer than Macdonald was. But that you can't take away, I think, from how talented the coordinator. I mean, Mike Macdonald came in, had a little bit of learning to do over the course of the first couple of weeks, but really turned into really good defensive coordinator for them over the course of the season. So maybe if it is Weiss, he follows it, but I'd be totally on board with a Ben Johnson or somebody of that nature also. But amazing insight as always, Spencer. I appreciate you as always. Thank you so much for joining me. Please tell people where they can find you and, of course, what you're working on.
You can find me always at BaltimoreBeatdown.com, the Baltimore Beatdown podcast. You can find anywhere you get your podcasts, and I'll be working on some exit stuff, working up some Mike McDonald articles now, some clips, all that good stuff, decompressing and breaking down this game. Gonna go through a couple times with a fine-tooth comb. It was a really fun one in many ways. I do think that the Ravens did a lot of good things, so you can find it all there, and I'll talk to you guys very soon.
A big shout out to Spencer for hopping on, providing his incredible analysis once again. And we'll see what happens with Lamar Jackson, with Greg Roman, and this entire offseason for the Ravens, which is honestly a really, really big one. But I appreciate you being here with me today, spending time listening to Locked On Ravens. If you haven't already, I implore you to like this video, subscribe to the channel. It does help out a ton. Also follow along in audio form. We are daily, 5 days a week, even in the offseason when we bring you Ravens content Monday through Friday. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to get back here tomorrow. We'll be diving into more Ravens content. Of course, so be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.